is Henrik Papsø, usually just known by my last name, Papsø. I work as head of communications for Amager Bryghus. I also deal with branding, and I deal with export of our products and about 100 more things. When you're in such a small place like Amager with only 4 people employed, you have many hats on. So I'm involved with a lot of things with Amager. To be honest, I don't remember the first beer I ever tried, but then again, if I really think hard, it might be a German canned beer called Horsey, which my sister brought up from Germany. It was back in those days when a lot of Danes went to buy cheap German beer across the border. And I think I might have only been like 10 years old. Is this gonna be censored? But anyways, it was I think it was a Horsey Pils, really cheap German lager when I was very young. But I started when I was just a teenager collecting Danish beer bottles. Really, that was how I got started. And I would always empty the bottles and try the beers, even though I wasn't that old. So I had a bottle collection when I was a teenager. And then beer has sort of always been on my mind, being an interest. I cannot really tell why. Back in those days, there wasn't much interesting Danish beer whatsoever. It was mainly, there's few brewers left in Denmark at the time, and most of what they did was Pilsner of different strengths. So to begin with, I was just a bottle collector, drinking piss-poor Danish lagers. And then as I grew up, became a student, I was studying political science, I got more involved. I moved to Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark, and there was some shops importing Belgian beers. So I would discover Chimay Bleu and Duvel and stuff like that. That was back in the 80s, I believe. And then when I was studying there in Aarhus, a Belgian guy moved into my floor. It was a dorm thing. And he was also, he was from Antwerp, and he was also very interested in beer. And we got acquainted, became good friends. So we started doing beer trips back to Belgium, and he would introduce me to the whole Belgian beer scene. We would stay at his parents' place in Antwerp and go visit breweries. So that sort of ignited my beer interest. So like many others, I started out with Belgian beers and then has sort of never stopped, never looked back from there, just always being curious about different beers. And then when I've been traveling, I've always been sampling different beers, taking notes. Even back then in the early 90s when I was discovering the Belgian beer scene, I was always taking notes just in notebooks. That was way before anything was called Ratebeer, So when I discovered Ratebeer many years later, I had tons and tons of notebooks, with beer ratings from the old days. So I entered all those, and then with Ratebeer there was a big Copenhagen scene of beer raters that I got acquainted with, and we would just meet up regularly, and we would all trade beers with other Ratebeerians from different parts of the world, and some would travel a lot and always collect beers. And when you're involved with a scene and a community like that, you're sort of always on the lookout for new beers. So we would always gather beers from different sources and meet up and sharing them. And every time we found a beer, we would know this is for sharing, not just for drinking on your own. So many people have wondered why the Danes have been able to try this many beers, but when you have a close-knit community, it's not really that difficult. And when you travel, you go to beer festivals and you meet up on a regular basis. Since I started working for Amager, I have stopped rating in public. I do a little bit on the side, with sometimes when I still attend very few tastings and stuff, and then I take notes. But I've stopped rating in public because I think it's not really compatible rating beers of colleagues and competitors when you work for one brewery. I don't really think that other brewers should know that this guy from Amager, he has this and this opinion about a beer. So I really try to sort of be independent when I'm sort of working professionally with beer. And also when I work full time with beer, I think it's necessary not to have a huge hobby with beer in my spare time, because then pretty much all of your life is beer. So I think it's healthy to keep the hobby down or keep it away from my professional life. And much to my surprise, it's been really easy to stop rating beers, even though on average, I've rated or tried 3 beers a day every day for 25 years. But it gets a little tiresome, because when it's such a huge hobby, it tends to be a bit of a job almost, that you have to meet up, you have to hunt down every new beer in town, or pretty much in the world, you know. So it can become a bit tedious at times. So much to my surprise, it was quite easy to stop. And in many ways it was a bit of a relief, because for a couple of years, as I said, it has been a bit of a hard job, you know, collecting all those beers. So I'm a happy retired rater, you can say.
Nice.
My first sort of celebration beer was when I had rated 10,000 beers. That was an Amager beer, because, as you know, I know the Amager guys from the beginning, and they're friends of mine. So they made a beer, and I think there was also a 15,000 beer, and there was a couple of 20,000 beers. And then for my 25th 25,000 celebration, to begin with, I was just going for 2 beers really, and those beers funnily never happened. My plan was to have a barley wine made by Gypsy boys in New Zealand, made with only Southern Hemisphere ingredients, and then the same barley wine made with Northern Hemisphere ingredients, brewed at Fanø, you know, Ryan, Merrithew. But Ryan at that time was moving to Sarin in United Kingdom. And then I asked Mike at Lerby if he would take over the enterprise for brewing the Northern Hemisphere, and he was happy to do so. But then some family stuff happened to him. So, and also Gypsy Boys was challenged with some problems they had. So those 2 beers never became reality. But I was sort of asking around, because I have a big network in the brewing world, pretty much all over the world. So really, I was just asking friends and brewers I knew. I have this celebration coming up. Would you be interested in brewing a beer for me? And much to my surprise, almost everybody said yes, they would do that. The only guy who said no was Sean Hill from Hill Farmstead, because he's so busy doing his own thing. But he sent a long, friendly mail to me that he couldn't do it. But apart from that, much to my surprise, everybody said yes. And I knew Joey Redner from Cigar City, the owner, from before he had a brewery. I knew him from Ratebeer. I was trading beers with him for many years, and I've been visiting him in Florida before he had the brewery and staying overnight. So he was a good friend, and I was very happy that Cigar City would brew a beer for me. I had a bit of a problem convincing Wayne, the brewer, that what I call a passion fruit porter was a good idea, but he ended up agreeing, and I think he came out with some a pretty good recipe. But most of those beers were sort of the design of the beer was mine, the idea of the beers were mine, but the brewer, of course, had to sit down himself and make a recipe. I cannot make a beer recipe, but I came up with an idea, and the brewers came up with the beer and the recipe. And then we had a big release in Denmark, in Copenhagen, back in May at the Fermentoren, a nice beer pub in Copenhagen, where all of these beers were released. To begin with, it wasn't really my plan that this was only going to be my stopping at Ratebeer, sort of my goodbye celebration beers. But as it turned out, because I got the job at Amager, then my celebration, my 25,000 celebration, was also my sort of goodbye to rating in public.
Yep.
I've been sort of, as you know, I've been interested in beers for many years, and then I got acquainted with some guys on the Danish beer scene that had these plans about starting an interest organization for beer in Denmark. Back in the late 90s, there wasn't much going on the Danish beer scene whatsoever. At that time, there was only 13 breweries left in Denmark, and they all pretty much produce the same style of beer, you know, just a lager of different strengths. So there was a lot of us that have been traveling, and we have been experiencing that you can get exciting, interesting beer abroad when you went to the US, United Kingdom, Belgium, Germany, whatever. You find more interesting and better quality beers than in Denmark. And we thought, why don't we make an interest organization that can push the Danish brewers to make more interesting beers, or even better, to encourage home brewers to start up their own brewery. And eventually in 1998, in September, we met to form this organization in Odense at a brew pub, not a brew pub, a beer pub called Carsten's Kvarter. I think there was only about 25-30 of us for the first meeting. But we sat down and formed the organization, and within very few years it became the most successful interest organization ever in Denmark, getting about 12,000 members within very few years. I think we're down to around 9,500, but still it is pretty powerful. And I think it has proved to be extremely successful, because from 13 brewers in 1998, there's about 10 times as many brewers in Denmark today. So that has been known as the Danish Beer Revolution. It's pretty much what happened in the US like 10 years or 15 years earlier. That happened in Denmark, and that's what you're experiencing in Norway right now, and also in Sweden. And I think it's amazing to be part. It's amazing to be part of a revolution, of course, always, whatever this revolution is about. But when it's about, you know, a product that you feel so much about, it's extremely interesting, and it's extremely rewarding to see that you were part in sort of making the environment fertile enough for these brewers to spring up and open. And today, the brewing scene in Denmark has thrived so much that we're probably amongst the most interesting brewery scenes in the world. I mean, probably there's a lot of things going on in many countries, but still I think Denmark is quite interesting. So it's been a pleasure to be part of that, and also to see that the craft beer revolution is spreading pretty much around the world these days. I'm often asked what is sort of the philosophy behind Amager Bryghus. To be completely honest, there's no sort of declared philosophy. But the guys behind Amager are just fun-loving guys that like to experiment, that like to brew beers that they themselves think are interesting. So there's no real philosophy other than putting out some great beers that we like ourselves, and we hope that a lot of people like, and then surviving in the beer business. But the thing about Amager is that we are sort of a funny brewery, because we have a strong, very local following at Amager. The beers that we sell the most of are sort of not bad beers, of course, but sort of mainstream beers, a golden ale, an American pale ale, a brown ale and stuff. Solid beers that are sold in supermarkets at Amager, and at beer bars and hotels and cafes and stuff. But it's no secret that what we really feel for are different beers that are more challenging beers, that are more extreme beers. Jacob the brewer is a keen hophead. He really likes his hops, and he likes to experiment a lot with different hops, and also with the degree of hoppiness. So we like to experiment a lot with hop-heavy beers, strong beers, solid dark beers, barrel-aged beers. So we're really playing around an awful lot, having a good time with what we do. And we've been fortunate enough that we don't really have to do much to sell our beers, because the customers come to us wanting our beers. We don't really do much in the selling part, because we cannot keep up with demand as it is. So we must be doing something right, I hope. Amager Bryghus started in April 2007. Jacob and Morten were two friends that knew each other from technical gymnasium. At that time, they were sort of they were asked by the teacher to do an assignment where they should present what they had learned in physics and chemistry, and that was quite a challenge, because they were happy boys and they hadn't really learned an awful lot. They were just drinking beer and chasing girls like any other boy at that time. So they were forced really to show what they had learned. So they went into problem-solving mode. That was usually sitting down, drinking some beers, and hope to find sort of the solution at the bottom of the empty glass. And at the end of the night, they had found absolutely nothing. So Jacob just said, he just sort of threw out, "Why don't we describe fermentation processes in beer?" And because it was so late and they had nothing better to come up with, they decided this was a great idea. So they bought a small home brewing kit and produced something that was technically beer, but I didn't try it. I didn't know them at the time, but it apparently wasn't very good at all. But they passed their exam, and they had there was a spark that had ignited about brewing, because they found that seeing fermentation, seeing what was going on in a beer when home brewing was quite interesting. And it was in those days when the Danish Beer Enthusiasts Society had just taken off. So they would bring some of their home brews to the local branch of the Danish Beer Enthusiasts Society. And they got some very nice feedback from the members there. So they were starting to wonder if can we take this home brewing to be a professional career. So they made a business plan and visited some banks, and eventually got funding for a brewery. They started looking for a location, bought a brewery, and then it's just been going on from there. The first brewery was quite cheap and primitive, but they still managed within the first year to brew a beer that got exported to the US and reached the top 50 on Ratebeer of the best beers in the world. So pretty early they had sort of the interest of the more sort of hardcore beer geek society, because they like to play around and do some challenging beers. And then things have just been progressing from there, really. By 2011, the brewery system they had at the time, the first system, was simply not big enough, and the tank capacity was not big enough. In 2011, they made 90,000 liters of beers, and that was the maximum capacity of what they had at the time. Then they bought a new brewing system, installed more tanks, and last year, in 2012, they had doubled the production of to 180,000 liters. And this year, we probably end up brewing 235,000 liters. And then again, we are at complete maximum capacity. So within 2 years, we sort of increased our income and brewing capacity with 150%. And right now, we're in a situation where we simply cannot keep up with demand at all. I have to say no to customers almost every day, and it's quite frustrating. So next year we're actually planning to expand our capacity to almost 400,000 liters, if we can get the funding in place for that. So we are still a growing business, even though we're fairly small. When we have Gypsy brewers brewing at our place, some of it has been sort of a friendship thing, you know, to invite brewers in that we know and that do not have their own brewing facility. So they've been friends of ours and been invited in to brew, like Mikilla and Evil Twin and stuff. But also it has, at times when we were still new in the business, it would be a good income, you know, to have beer that was already sold when it was done, you know, for a Gypsy brewer. And also it's always interesting to have the input of other brewers, you know, and to work with them and see how they're doing things and what their ideas are brewing. So it's sort of it's a fertile, it's a fruitful environment to work with other brewers as Gypsy brewers. But right now we're in a situation where we can hardly produce enough of our own brands, so we don't really have much room anymore for Gypsy brewers. I have turned down several requests for brewers that want to work with us because we simply do not have the space and the capacity anymore for many Gypsy brewers. So these days we brew a little for Mikilla, we brewed a little for Kissmeyer, and that's about it in the recent year.
Yeah, but you still do collaborations.
Yeah. Collaborations are something that we really love to do an awful lot. Many people have this sort of romantic idea of what it is like being a brewer, that you sort of dance around the brewery every day and it's fun from early in the morning till late in the night. But to be honest, you know, there's an awful lot of hard labor, an awful lot of cleaning, a lot of things that are not so joyful in brewing. So there's a lot of tedious work when you're a brewer. So sometimes it's fun to have a day off, have a fun day working with other brewers from around the world to get some input from from other brewers. And that's why we really love to do collaborations. And it's no secret that we are very much inspired by the whole American craft brewing scene. So the brewers that we really love to brew the most with, collaborate with, are American brewers. Some brewers come pretty much just to have a fun day with us, and other brewers like Wayne Wambles from Cigar City. He's more nerdy than Jacob, our head brewer, you know, and he's down into each and every detail in the brew. So we can learn a lot from some brewers, and other brewers, as I said, it's more to have a fun day. Yeah. But it's something that we really appreciate, that's working with other brewers. It's cool to be part of a thriving brewery because we've really been extremely successful, pretty much from the start off, but also in the last year to see that we are gaining more and more ground on the export markets. This year we have passed the 50% mark for export. I think by the end of 2013, 55% of our production will go abroad, which is pretty unique for a small brewery like ours. And it's fun to be part of a brewery that has been getting a lot of attention from the media and from our collaborations, and it's great to, you know, get in touch with brewers, and you don't have to explain who you are because they already know, you know. And yeah, so it's a great experience to be part of something that's really happening, and to see that what you do is getting some positive feedback, that people like what you're doing, even though you're just really a couple of playful kids, pretty much. So there's no huge big marketing strategy or anything behind Amager. Sometimes I've been asked, what was the idea, what was the strategy behind the Sinner series and stuff, but to be honest, it was just a crazy idea that came up one Friday afternoon at the after hours beer, you know. Why don't we make a series of beers based on the 7 deadly sins? And that sort of job was just given to me to develop it, you know, and things have just been taking off. So we're just really playful dudes, pretty much. But as I said, it's great to see that what we do is appreciated, not just locally, but pretty much around the world.
Cool.
because we've been so successful, we're in a situation right now where we cannot keep up with demand. I have to say no to customers almost every day. I have to decide who gets what, because we cannot give everybody the amount of beer they want. So that's pretty frustrating. So we hope by next year that we'll be able to expand our capacity to almost double of what we produce now. We hope to be able to buy our own facilities. It's not sure that we can do that, but otherwise we hope to be able to expand where we are right now. So it's pretty much just keep on doing what we do, keep putting out crazy beers, happy beers, beers that we like and that we hope that you guys will like also.
Excellent, thank you so much.
You're welcome.